QSO Today, episode 313, Carole Perry, WB2MGP, a reprise. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by Icom America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, reminding you to check out their new IC705 all-band portable transceiver. More on this later, and by QRP Labs, makers of the popular QCX kit transceiver and a whole host of parts and kits for the ham radio builder. My thanks to both Icom America and QRP Labs for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. Be sure to look for them next week at the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo, as they are both on the exhibit floor, and Icom is our platinum sponsor. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Uth4Z1UG, your host. We are in the final stretch of the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo, coming to your computer, laptop, and smartphone on August 8th at 45 minutes past midnight Zulu time, or GMT, followed by the keynote address by Dr. Scott Wright, K0MD. Be sure to make your free registration if you have not already done so. I have to say that the support from you, my dear listeners, and the general ham community has been amazing. As of this recording, we have just passed 19,000 registered attendees with a week to go. My team of Brad, Emanuela, Rachel, Rivka, and Ben are burning their candles at both ends to make this a successful event, with the caveat that this is the first time that any of us has ever put this kind of event together, especially a virtual one with a lot of unknown elements. We all hope that this will be an amazing experience and success, and that you will forgive any errors, mistakes, and forgotten details. We are writing the book on how to do this, and we have a chance in March of 2021 to apply what we learn. Because of our and my enormous workflow for the last month leading up to the Expo, I have not recorded new episodes of the QSO Today podcast. Instead, I'm pulling out of my inventory of over 300 interviews and bringing forward a reprise of interviews related to the upcoming Expo. Carole Perry, WB2MGP, was my guest in episode 51, 5 years ago this week. Carole has led a youth forum for kids at both the Dayton and Huntsville hamfests for many years. Because of their cancellation, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, I've asked Carole to bring her kids to the Expo. She and her kids have made amazing contributions with their videos, so we spliced them into one long video, an hour and 45 minutes long. However, these videos are well done, interesting, and clever. At the end of the presentations, Carole and the kids will be in Track 3 Zoom room for your questions. Look at the speaker schedule for the times on the Expo website. Frankly, if these kids are the future of ham radio, I'm not worried one bit about our ham radio future. They will do great things. So sit back, walk the dog, mow the lawn, and enjoy with me this interview with Carole Perry, WB2MGP. WB2MGP, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Carole?
Yes, I am. Hi, Eric. This is Carole.
Hi, Carole. Thanks so much for joining me on QSO Today. Can we start at the very beginning, Carole? When and how did you become involved in amateur radio?
Well, that's one of my favorite stories to tell, Eric. Years ago, in the late 70s, I was working as an executive vice president for an electronics manufacturing company in Brooklyn, New York. And during my lunchtime, I would notice that the engineers were all having a good time with this mysterious thing called amateur radio. And I would watch them as they spoke with people worldwide. And one day I said, that looks like lots of fun. Maybe I will get an FCC license too. And their classic, never will I forget, comment back to me was, it is a lot of fun, but you'll never get a license because it's just not something women do. And so the gauntlet was dropped. And
those are fighting words.
The gauntlet was dropped, and I made up my mind at that point, even if I never picked up a microphone, I was going to get an FCC license.
And so what did you go after in the late 70s? Which license did you go after?
Well, that was the novice license. Again, just this kind of accepting a dare to show that I could do it.
Uh-huh. Can I be so bold as to ask how old you were at the time that you got your novice license?
Oh, I don't remember the exact day. I guess I was in my late 40s at that point.
That is amazing too. And do you remember what your novice call sign was?
WB2MGP. I stuck with it for reasons that will probably come out as we discuss my teaching experience with ham radio.
And this was also at a time before the CW requirement was lifted, so you also learned Morse code.
Correct.
After that, how long did it take for you to advance to general class?
Well, once I began teaching and getting involved with amateur radio in the school curriculum, that's when I thought it was appropriate to upgrade to general.
Did you have any Elmers or mentors who helped you get going?
Yes, I did. With all the amazement that I actually followed through, and in those days went down to the FCC building in Manhattan and actually passed and got my license. The gentlemen, the engineers at the company that I worked for were very instrumental, and one in particular, W2SLP, who is a silent key right now.
Do you remember his name?
Roger Isaacs.
Okay, well, great. And do you remember what your first rig was? Did you work from the company or did you build your own station?
Well, as a gift for my, quote, miraculous, unquote, achievement, the engineers at the company presented me with my very first rig, which was a Yaesu FT Foxtrot Tango 208R, a 2-meter handheld. And I still have it today.
Uh-huh. And do you use it?
No.
You're not active on the air with it.
Oh, I use other equipment today, but I kept that as kind of a souvenir.
Oh, why not? And what rig do you operate now?
Well, the one that I had in my classroom, which rotates between my home and the schools locally where I do a lot of demos, is a Kenwood TS Tango Sugar 440S.
And what's your favorite operating mode?
It really depends on where I am and what I'm doing. I love them both.
You love both CW and single sideband?
Well, mostly on my demos, it's not CW. It's right. Voice. And as I go across the country and do a lot of demos, it's mostly with a 2-meter rig where I prearrange skids with local ham radio operators.
Did you make any professional choices based on your amateur radio license? You know, you work for this electronics company. Now you have your license. Did you choose a career path that would put you into the focus of amateur radio?
Well, the answer is underlined with red ink. Absolutely yes, but I kind of evolved into it rather than use the word chose it. When the electronics company that I worked for relocated, I had to make some important career choices. I wasn't ready to move from my location in Staten Island, New York. And so I went back to my first love, which was teaching at a local middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And I was only doing it temporarily as I was making up my mind whether I actually wanted to move and relocate with the company. But what happened is opportunity came up in that the principal of the school liked the idea that I fit right in and that the kids related to me and I related to that age group. Which I lovingly refer to as the hormone age.
It's a difficult age group.
Yeah. But what I was doing was he assigned me to what we called a shop class in those days, where kids would get skills in either home economics, cooking, woodworking, etc. And he said, there's an opening for one term with a teacher who's out on a disability. We know you can handle the kids. I will offer you a position for 6 months, and you can teach pretty much anything you want in that time slot. And I said, well, I have an interesting hobby, amateur radio. Let's see how the kids respond to it. And it was, Eric, it was a meant-to-be situation where not only did the kids respond to it, but the parents of those kids responded to it. And the principal then offered me a full-time position. And in addition, had me write curriculum as the years went by. So it established introduction to amateur radio as part of the New York City school curriculum. I kind of just evolved into a perfect storm of a situation, which to this day I still am amazed at.
Well, this is the amateur radio dream job, where you get to pursue your hobby and get paid for it.
That is a perfect way of describing it, Eric. I got to teach what I loved, what I enjoyed, and in the process enriched the curriculum for these students. And the outcome was 30 years of doing it ended up producing quite a large number of amateur radio operators in the process.
Well, so Carole, then you must have the secret sauce, because, all of us who mentor kids, I've had a kid that's come to me for a few years now to learn amateur radio. And so you must have the secret sauce of what it takes to capture their imagination and keep them in it. Can you talk a little bit about what's in your curriculum and what that secret sauce is?
Okay, well, I never thought of it as a secret. My first love always was the teaching aspect of it. In my mind, it was never meant to be a licensing class. It was meant to be an enrichment, and in the process exposing kids to the fabulous hobby and service of amateur radio. Now, what I think was unique about it, and let's not forget that I had 40, that's 40 students in each of 12 classes in my week at school. I would get 12 classes. I saw each class twice a week, and they were loaded with either 35 up to 40 students. And this included everybody, Eric. At some point in their 6th, 7th, or 8th grade school career, those students were going to come through my program. And so I had to assure them at the beginning it was okay if they chose not to get an amateur radio license. It was certainly not a requirement. All I required of them was to be open-minded, be willing to have an adventure with me that they were never going to have in any other class they took at school, to be respectful of each other, of me, and certainly when they're on the air, we established those rules at the beginning, and to be open-minded for a new experience, and that if at the end of the term I deemed and they were willing to try to get an amateur radio license, I would then pass them along to a local club as a support group and help enable them to get their ham radio license. So all the pressure was off them. There was no license hanging over their head except as a carrot of something wonderful you could achieve if you and I both agreed that you were a good candidate for it. All you had to do was be open-minded, follow my rules, and be willing to go on adventure. Now, I had in each class special needs children, foreign language only speaking children, children of every kind of different background you could imagine, academically, ethnically, etc. It was a typical New York City middle school, and I had everybody coming through the program. I think the key to it was my own passion and enthusiasm for the hobby, and my love of sharing it, especially with the young people and all that they brought to the hobby as well once they got involved. And once the program got established, and through the years, I did it for almost 30 years, I would bring kids who did get licensed back into the program to be special guest speakers to tell the other kids about the fun that they were having with it. So it was a well-organized, yet open to new adventures every day, depending on where our contacts would arrive from. And it was a chance for the at-risk students as well to do well, maybe for the first time in their school careers, in this very unusual program, which in fact the principal made sure was a basic part of the school's curriculum after a number of years. So it was just I think my love for the curriculum, to respond to your question, and seeing the results every day in front of me is what helped keep me motivated and have the kids have a good quality educational experience in school every day that they came to my class.
And now this message from Icom America. Get out and be active with Icom's new IC705 and its optional multifunction backpack. The Icom IC705 is your perfect QRP companion, as it has many of the same base station features and functionality of Icom's bigger rigs. At the tip of your fingers, in a portable package covering HF 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters. This compact rig weighs in at 1 kilo or just over 2 pounds, with RF direct sampling for most of the HF band and IF sampling for frequencies above 25 megahertz. The Icom IC705 has a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen with live band scope and waterfall, similar to the IC7300. I can't wait to get my IC705 to use as a baseband rig for satellites and microwave projects, including the S-HALE geosynchronous satellite. The Icom IC705 puts out 5 watts with its BP272 battery pack and a full 10 watts when connected to an external 13.8-volt power supply. The rig does single sideband, CW, AM, FM, as well as full D-Star functions. Other features include micro USB connector, Bluetooth and wireless LAN over Wi-Fi, integrated GPS with antenna and GPS logger, a micro SD card slot, and the HM243 speaker microphone is standard equipment. As this is the perfect QRP or QRPP rig, the perfect accessory for the IC705 is the optional LC192 backpack with its special compartment for the IC705 and room for accessories for soda activations or just a day social distancing in the park. For more information on this fabulous new rig, click on the banner in this week's show notes. And when you go to buy your new Icom IC705, be sure to tell your dealer that you heard about it here on QSO Today. My thanks to Icom America for sponsorship of the QSO Today podcast. To drill down a little bit more, I'm married to a high school teacher, and 40 kids in a classroom is an amazing management feat, and almost 500 kids a week, I think that's what you're saying, is also an amazing management feat. Can you talk about a little bit about what your classroom session might be like in terms of how you broke it up and how you kept the kids engaged?
Absolutely. And once again, Eric, you hit on one of the key buzzwords, management. As I go across the country and try to initiate programs like what I had in other schools, I always stress classroom management techniques. As well, you know, maybe because you're married to a teacher, 40 teenagers coming into your classroom. And yes, at the end of the year, there were 900 kids from 2 terms that did come through the program. 40 kids sitting in the classroom. Obviously, everyone had to be occupied. When I was at the back of the room with a youngster who would be on the radio, what were the other 39 students doing? And the answer was, it wasn't haphazard. Everybody had a specific function. One would be at the board logging in contacts. Another would be at the big wall map, pulling a string that I had from Staten Island to wherever in the world we made a contact. And that produced lots and lots of interesting geography lessons, because no matter where the contact would be, they would always start out in Staten Island to locate it on the map. And somebody else would be at an atlas, somebody else would be at a globe, and everybody had a specific function. When I was in the back at the ham radio station with a different youngster, the formatting of each period, I saw each group twice a week. At the beginning of the lesson, I would distribute little code keys, code practice oscillators that were designed specifically for my program. It was a self-contained code key. I kept calling it a code key, a code practice oscillator in a lady's jewelry earring box. I had gone back to where I previously worked at the electronics manufacturing company, and they designed it for me. And for many years, that's what we used. Each child would be given one of those to practice on. Now, when we gave them out, I did this for the beginning 10 minutes of every period. One child would, at the beginning of doing this, till we got more advanced to words and sentences, etc., they would send a letter and then advancing to a word on the buddy system to the person sitting directly next to them. So I'd like you to picture in your mind's eye, in a classroom, 40 kids, and 20 of them are sending letters and or words to the person sitting right next to them. And then after a couple of minutes, I would have them switch and the other person would listen. And Eric, at the beginning of every term for almost 30 years, inevitably, one student would raise a hand and say, "But Miss Perry, I cannot hear the person sitting next to me because I'm hearing everybody else's device going off. It's too much noise. I cannot hear it." And I would say, "Well, that's too bad. Concentrate. Listen only to the person sitting next to you." And this is how every session would go at the beginning. And at the end of the term, inevitably, when they were actually having QSOs with each other on these little code keys, somebody would say, "Remember when we couldn't hear each other? And now look what we're doing." And the realization proved the point of, besides teaching code, you are teaching a very important skill, and that is concentration and listening skills. And that is something that traditionally does not get taught in a classroom setting. So after 10 minutes, with the height of excitement about the fun that they're having with the tactile experience of using the little code practice oscillator, at the height of their excitement, usually 10 to 15 minutes, I would say, "Okay, we're finished now. We're collecting the code keys. We'll use them again the next time I see you." And inevitably, because they were at the height of the excitement, they would say, "No, we're just getting started." "Well, no, too bad. It's time to move along." And we would collect the keys for another day. So they were always looking forward to doing that because I limited the time that we were doing it. And if they were not a prearranged schedule, for example, 2 days a week, for many years on 10 meters, I had the CQ All School Net, which I ran with Gordon West, who would get on the West Coast, and we would have many interesting school contacts on that net that we ran. When it wasn't a prearranged sched that I had lined up, we would actually do basic lessons. One day would be radio phenomena. Another day might be rules and regulations and why they were important. And during one of the years, I especially remember when the Titanic movie came out. That gave me a very unusual opportunity, and we incorporated scenes from the movie, from the radio room. And at one point, as people walked down the hallway, they could hear the theme music of Titanic playing. And of course, everybody wanted to come in and see what was going on in my room. So I always try to tie in something that could be relevant to the kids. And of course, that was a popular movie and gave me a unique opportunity of bringing some of those radio lessons into the classroom as well. But every day, the idea was we never know who we're going to be reaching on the air. So get ready for an unusual opportunity. And then if something happened and I could tie it into 6th, 7th, or 8th grade curriculum, that was the best of all, because that's what validated my being part of the school curriculum. In other words, if the sixth grade, Eric, was studying about the expansion of the Old West, I would set up a telegraph key office in my classroom, and we would discuss the importance of communications in developing the Old West in the United States history. Science and math, learning about longitude, latitude, that's kind of obvious, the correlation. I always tied it into that grade's curriculum. Foreign language students, getting to have some of them as we were listening, if we were lucky enough to hear that on the radio. There was always something going on, including current events. If we were talking to a ham radio operator, for example, in Puerto Rico during a hurricane, the next lesson I would have is, well, what exactly is a hurricane and how do you think it affected and what were the side effects, etc. So there was always a direct tie-in, including actually talking to a school in San Francisco during an earthquake. And the kids would get to ask, well, do you get evacuated? Are your parents coming to pick you up? It was live interacting with the world and tying it in to the school's curriculum. And with all of this excitement and the wonder of what was going to happen every day in that classroom, the most exciting things were the terms that we had that we were either already assigned to make space shuttle contacts or to be lucky enough to have check-ins from W5RRR, which is the amateur radio station at the Johnson Space Center. So every term there was always something really super exciting to look forward to. And the 50-minute sessions that we had, to answer your question of how a typical day went, I'm proud to say there was nothing typical in 30 years of doing it, which was the fun of doing it, except the basic rules of classroom management and always the excitement of what we could expect that day. And that was not only from the kids' perspective, but from mine as well. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, but that's how the day pretty well got formatted. We never knew was the biggest, I think, attraction to the program, in that it was always exciting.
So you were never teaching Ohm's law and basic electricity necessarily, or electronics?
Oh, of course I was. Definitely I was. And that would always be part of the lesson as well. I'm giving you the highlights. Some days it was radio phenomena, some day it was rules, so that they knew if they were looking to pursue the license, that this was going to be part of it. I always followed the ARRL instructor's book with the different categories, etc. And I realized that once they were out of what I called my nagging range, and I didn't have them, some of the kids went on to get their license, admittedly, to shut me up. But because it was the academically correct thing to do. But those who really did love it, I passed them along to the local clubs when I realized I needed that kind of follow-up, because I wasn't going to be able to do it with the 40 kids of every kind of background in front of me each day. So we ended up kind of evolving into a system that worked very nicely. And to this day, those kids, because I live on Staten Island, are now parents themselves who I bump into all over. And some of them bring their children with them to come and meet me at Dayton or other conventions where they know I'll be.
What kind of infrastructure did you have at your school in terms of antennas and station and stuff?
Well, as I said, I had the HF rig, and through the years, a lot of local hams donated different equipment to me. When it came time to a shuttle contact, the local clubs brought in those days, you needed a lot more equipment than you would today to make a contact with the International Space Station. And it became a community event. We had all the local TV stations showed up the day we made a contact with Tony England, was one of the first astronauts we actually made a contact with as the shuttle went overhead. And I believe he was W5ORE, Tony England. And so there was a lot of community involvement in what we did. And we kept the equipment fairly simple because there was no reason not to. But anytime I needed something, I had a tri-bander antenna on the roof, 10, 15, and 20, which got donated by Cushcraft when we were part of a movie that was produced by the ARRL, the American Radio Relay League, with Roy Neal, who came to my school and helped introduce a segment from my classroom that appeared in the New World of Amateur Radio Video. And so a lot of our equipment ended up getting donated, but it was kept kind of simple. And when the kids got licensed, they would love coming back and telling me that their equipment was more updated than mine at home. But that's okay. It did its job and it worked fine.
Can you estimate how many hams you might have produced over 30 years on Staten Island?
Well, you know what happened at the beginning? We didn't keep records of it because in my wildest imagination, could never have foreseen that this was going to be my career, literally, for the next 29 years. I would say, if I had to guess, it's easily a few thousand amateur radio operators, and those who have remained active as adults now and who are on Staten Island managed to stay in touch with me, which is extremely gratifying to me.
Well, I've never been on Staten Island, and I'm assuming that it's not that large. Does that mean that you may have amateur radio congestion on Staten Island?
Well, we do have major clubs. We have, I wouldn't call it. we have a large number of amateur radio operators who are extremely active. We have a repeater club, and that's where a couple of my students, in fact, ended up as adults at this point, because I've been retired for 11 years, plus the 30 years of actually teaching it. And again, by the end of the term, by limiting it so that they had to go through the whole term and then be passed along to the local clubs and then get licensed, really only those who wanted to do it without having me hanging over their head were the ones who did it, and for the most part remained active in it. And if I might share a funny incident with you, which shows the point, the other day I was parking my car, and yes, Staten Island is only 23 miles long and about 20 miles across. I was parking and an unmarked police car made a quick U-turn, screeched, and came up to the driver's side of my car. And I said, "What seems to be the problem, officer?" And he says, "Nothing, WB2MGP. I saw your license plate, Miss Perry, and I just wanted to say hi." And it turned out to be the police officer was in my 6th grade amateur radio class many years ago and recognized my amateur radio plates. And so we had a discussion, and he said, "I never thought I would want to get the license, so I never pursued it, but I never forgot the fun I had in the class. Is it too late now?" At which point I immediately took his address and sent him license manuals, etc., and said, "You just contact me when you're ready." This happened a couple of months ago. "Contact me when you're ready to get it." And I said, "By the way, why did you make that illegal U-turn and come screeching alongside of me?" And he pointed his finger at me and shook it and said, "You can't tell me what to do anymore." And so I've had a couple of different incidents like that where, as adults in different professions on Staten Island, they've come back and pulled that little surprise on me.
Hey, this is Eric for just another short break. One of my favorite ham radio podcasts is the Ham Radio Workbench podcast. hosted by George, KJ6VU, my guest in episode 232, and Jeremy, KF7IJZ. George and Jeremy take a bi-weekly deep dive into their favorite ham radio workbench projects and the technologies that fascinate them. If you want to be a ham radio builder or just be inspired, click on the link in this week's show notes page.
Carole, what do you say to people that, especially ham old-timers, because I hear that here, that with the internet and cell phones, that there's no way for ham radio to compete with that stuff for kids? What do you say to those people?
Well, it doesn't have to compete. It's a different venue, different entity altogether. I try not to compare the two, but let's show why this is unique. And I always used to tell the kids as a life lesson, if something is free, it's probably not the same value as something that you've got to work to get. You're with a select group of people who had to pass an examination to become licensed to use certain equipment. So immediately you're in a different category from something that everybody has access to. And in the early 80s, when I began teaching, we used to compare it to CB radio, the Citizens Band radio. And I would point out, anybody can use CB. Not everybody will ever be allowed to use amateur radio equipment and frequencies, etc. I said, so there's a reason why you have to work for something, because it's offering things that the other thing that's open to everybody doesn't offer. It's with a select group of people for the most part. You know the identity of who it is you're speaking with. And you're able to do things that help out in a community, which you cannot do with necessarily with the other venues, like being an accredited group that can help out in police emergencies. And that's very big on Staten Island, which is a community-minded borough where their kids get to participate. Certainly in the New York City Marathon, that could probably never be run without the assistance of amateur radio operators. You've got trained people on radios that can go a greater distance and accomplish a lot more. So there's a lot of different facets to it. And through the years of decades of teaching this, Eric, of course, I've seen how as the technology changes, so did amateur radio. What the kids years ago used to be interested in accomplishing before the cell phone era, where that was a big attraction to be able to patch in and use the radio to make phone calls. Today, of course, that's no big feat, but a lot of the kids today, as I go across the country in that age bracket, are interested in robotics and incorporating the amateur radio love of the hobby with robotic inventions, many of which I have featured at the Dayton Hamvention of different fabulous inventions that the kids have come up with. So as the technology changes, it still remains different and apart. The two are two different things is how I like to explain it.
There's a lot of old timers out there that could actually take a kid under their wing.
Oh, absolutely.
But they don't know where to start.
Exactly.
You know, they don't have a common language.
Exactly. Well, allow me, if I may, you got me started. This is obviously what I'm passionate about. Before I became a member of QCWA, I used to invite the local members of QCWA to come into my classroom and to share their stories and their expertise with the kids in my class. It gave them an incentive to get up in the morning, put on a sport jacket or a suit and come into a classroom. And you combine the experience and expertise and wisdom of age with the enthusiasm and energy of young people. You've got a winning combination going. The kids used to look forward to it when these guys used to come in and speak and talk to them and show them how to solder and show them how to do different things. You combine those two ages, I always experienced a winning combination.
Carole, if I or my club wanted to introduce ham radio to a group of kids, what would be the best way to go about that?
You immediately hit me as somebody who will make good use of this thought. And to me, a goal without a plan is nothing more than a wish. You need to have a plan to get something in motion. And that's where the breakdown, I believe, occurs in ham radio. One of my best suggestions, which you are in a position to pass along, please do, is I always encourage the local clubs, go into a local school, do a demonstration at night for the local PTA, the Parent Teachers Association. They're always looking for speakers to come in. And then somehow get yourself positioned, and I can give you advice how, to teach at least one lesson in a school. Set up an HF rig in the school cafeteria. You will have a lineup of kids ready to get on and talk on that microphone, and then get a teacher involved with helping to get the program in. But here's what differs from my advice beside that one. Don't necessarily go into a school that has gifted programs. They have no lack of speakers coming in. Go into an underperforming school. Go into a school that's in a neighborhood where the kids need and don't have role models. How about your becoming one? Go into a school that doesn't get exposure of amateur radio to the average student there. Introduce them to it. Do a glitzy, fun lesson. I'll send you a lesson plan of what to do. But if you target those schools, I think that opens up a whole new demographic of perhaps future contributors to amateur radio.
Well, Staten Island was pummeled by Hurricane Sandy, as I recall.
Oh, yes.
It seems to me that perhaps you have a large number of hams on Staten Island who were able to come to the scene. Is that how it actually played out?
Well, I'm going to say yes and no. Of course, whoever got hit by it, and it was, I can't even describe it. It was so devastating. The land formation on the southern part and the eastern part of the island where the beaches are has been changed forever. That land formation will never be the same. There were deaths. There were colleagues of mine who drowned in their own homes. I mean, it was a devastation one doesn't expect in this country, no less in New York. It was really quite something. So a lot of people, hams certainly included, were protecting their own property initially. But then once the repeaters got going, it was a lot of medical assistance and communications. I myself live up on a hill, Toad Hill, that's Tango Oscar Delta Tango. Toad Hill is the highest natural elevation on the eastern seaboard. And I'm right below the tip of Toad Hill. So I had minor damage to the home compared to what other people suffered. So initially it was scrambling to protect one's life, limb, and property. And then the repeaters became active with going down to the devastated lowland beach area. And when I did go down there, way before Red Cross or the other organizations that came to help out arrived, you saw ham radio operators down there getting an assessment of what was needed and then allowing that to be told over the repeater so that people could come with cleaning supplies and things to help rebuild houses, and tremendous clothing drives were set up, and a lot of this was done through the ham radio repeaters.
What role do you play in the Radio Club of America?
Well, I became a director of the Radio Club of America. And as I looked around at the board members, I thought to myself, what am I doing here? These were all prominent people in science, in ownership of wireless communications companies. Marty Cooper of Motorola cell phone invention fame sat on that board with me. And I kept thinking, what could I possibly have to offer to this very austere group? And so I said, well, the demographic that I can bring to the table are high school age and below. You already have a scholarship program, RCA does, of giving money to students who are pursuing technical careers in college. I said, my demographic is high school and below. I will come up with a proposal of how I think maybe we can attract young people, because RCA is not a ham organization. It's a wireless society, which includes about a third of the membership being hams. And I came up with a proposal that was unanimously and enthusiastically accepted. And so they created a standing committee of youth activities, and I chair that committee. In fact, Gordon West would be the name you would know, who's one of the more famous people on that committee. He's a member of RCA as well with me. And I go literally across the country several times a year, speaking at different conventions, but as well going into schools where teachers or administrators have contacted me and have said, where do I begin, or how do I enhance the small little club I've already gotten started? And I do this with museums across the country as well that we support. If there is a need for me to go to do some good, to get something going, I will go and either give money in the way of support. I have my own budget. Or provide them with books, manuals, etc. In some cases, equipment. And I will come, teach a lesson, do a lesson, etc. But I will do what it takes after I have vetted that it is a viable place for me to spend my time, to be there for a day or a weekend. And I actually go into these places, certainly at the museums, and give them the ideas and perhaps some of the tools that they need to get either a licensing class getting going in a museum, or to actually get it. I've never seen anybody get it the way I was lucky enough to have, where it's part of a school curriculum, but I can get a technology class going, the STEM, Sierra Tango Echo Mike, science, technology, engineering, and math programs are being set up across the country. I will go and support those as well if they include a portion of amateur radio in it. So in different ways that different people are doing it, they've just got to convince me that what they've got is a viable program to support, and I will perhaps come in person to help them getting it going, or give them whatever the tools are that they need to help get it started, including ideas for recruiting of kids into different clubs across the country.
And now this message from QRP Labs. QRP Labs has shipped thousands of QCX QRP transceivers kits to date. The odds of working another QCX user gets better every day. If you're looking for a satisfying kit experience where you end up with an amazing performing QRP transceiver for under $50, let me say that again, for under $50, then you owe it to yourself to go to QRP Labs. We have many home brewers who listen to the QSO Today podcast. For you, QRP Labs also has parts, filters, enclosures, and other handy devices to make your home brewing experience even better. You can use these parts to either enhance your QRP Labs kits or to beef up your own homebrew designs. Be sure to browse Hand's entire website. Use the link on this week's show notes page or the one in the sponsored section of the QSO Today website to get to QRP Labs to buy your QCX or any of the other fine QRP Labs kits or parts. QRP Labs is my go-to ham radio kit company. It should be yours too. QRP Labs. And now back to our QSO Today. Do you think the average ham should join the Radio Club of America?
Oh, absolutely. If you're interested in meeting, I'm not looking to drop names, but we've certainly had many, many notables in the club during the years. Fred Link, who's got his own showcase at the Smithsonian for his creativity in ham radio. Frank Gunther, who was the one who invited me to join RCA, Armstrong, Lear. So if you're interested in meeting people who are on top of the wireless industry today, many different interesting people. And I would encourage you to join it and help me out with youth activities. I've gotten some phenomenal assistance by having a team that I've set up on my committee that if I can't be on the West Coast, I've got somebody on my committee who can help get into a school under my direction and do what needs to be done. So certainly, why not? If you're interested and you love what we're doing and you want to expand your horizons, why not?
What was or is Hams with Class?
Hams with Class was a column that I was initially invited to write for Wayne Green in 73 magazine. Hams with Class. It was designed. I thought it was a really clever name. It was a column designed to answer questions of teachers who began sending me, in those days, letters, now emails about how can I recruit? How do you suggest I approach a principal to get this into a school? How can I get this going? Where can I get funds? And I would address those issues in that column. And presently, I'm a writer, a columnist for CQ magazine, and they call it the Young Amateur column. But that's where Hams with Class came from. It was a column for 73 magazine.
You're also a director of QCWA, or the Quarter Century Wireless Association. Can you tell us what the QCWA is and what it does and what your involvement is?
Oh, yes. This is one of my, I'm going to say, what looks like is going to be one of my proudest accomplishments. QCWA, as most other amateur radio organizations, or probably any organization, really needs to attract new members, preferably a younger demographic, in order for it to be a viable organization. You need to bring new thoughts, new people, new ideas, younger people, to pick up where we're going to be leaving off, into its organization. The president of QCWA, Ken Oki, who I absolutely just admire for his insightful perspective on things, encouraged me to become a director so that I could bring out this initiative with that organization as well. They too have a tremendous scholarship program that they do through FAR, Foxtrot Alpha Romeo. They make substantial contributions, again, to young people pursuing technical careers. They have a tremendous worldwide membership. Of course, that's once you've been in the hobby for more than 25 years. Worldwide, 5,000 members, I believe. And when I was in Friedrichshafen, Germany, just to digress for 1 second, last summer as a forum speaker, the QCWA chapter there in Friedrichshafen, Germany, welcomed me with such open arms because they too are looking for ways to go into schools and attract young people into amateur radio. And in fact, the keynote speaker at that convention last year was a 15-year-old boy who begged the group to provide him with more young hams that he can speak with on the radio. So it's not just an issue in this country, it's one pretty much worldwide. But getting back to QCWA specifically, on the board, Ken, the president, has now made it be a standing committee for youth activities that I head up. And for the first time at Dayton this past May, he had me as a guest speaker at the QCWA forum, where I presented initiatives of how to be affiliated with and attract and recruit young people and to support their efforts in amateur radio. And this, I think, was a thought that they weren't going down that road until I pointed out that's where our replacements, that's where the pool is, that's the root of the flower that is us. That's going to take place one day and replace us. And so I've instituted a couple of new initiatives where I suggest they affiliate themselves with youth, being my demographic, high school and below. And so for the first time ever at my podium at the Youth Forum, where I have a big sign at the podium of all the co-sponsors of my forum, because we give the kids who present thousands of dollars worth of gifts, QCWA is now a sponsor of one of the contests that I run, which is Young Ham Lends a Hand, where I select one youngster that's been nominated through the year who has given back in the way of service to the amateur radio community, has given back through the hobby. And we give them $100 stipend at Dayton. And QCWA is now sponsoring that. So now the logo, that beautiful logo, is up at the podium where I speak and where the kids come up to speak. So they're becoming affiliated with youth activities. I'm suggesting that they have people sign up at their booth at the conventions. Anyone who wants to join me on that committee to initiate where are all the scholarship winners after you give them money? Let's find out. Let's invite them to speak at local QCWA chapters. Let's invite them to speak at Dayton. And so one of my young presenters from a few years ago at the Youth Forum happened to be the recipient of a scholarship from QCWA, and I invited him to speak at that forum as well. So it's kind of opening the door somewhat to QCWA supporting a demographic that they normally wouldn't have recognized as being an important one to be supportive of. And Eric, I will share with you one young man, 17 years old, Tom Jose, traveled 38 hours, 5 different plane changes to get to speak at my youth forum this past May at Dayton. He's from India. He came with an escort from the organization that sponsored him from the National Institute of Amateur Radio in India to give a presentation at Dayton where he talked about how he has an arm-long list resume of all the help that he gives during disaster situations in India. And I invited him to come and speak after he did my forum. I took him with me to the QCWA forum where he was a speaker as well, because he's applying for a QCWA scholarship. And I cannot think of anybody more deserving of this young man than to get one. But the idea is I'm trying to shift the way of thinking to be more inclusive of the young people. They might be too young now to join QCWA, but you're investing in the future. And that's the kind of philosophy I'm looking to inculcate there.
Frankly, those of us that entered ham radio as kids know that a quarter of a century goes really fast. So you'll have your members, I think, if they get in as kids, and that 25 years will just, go by really quickly.
I totally agree.
What do you think, as a leader of the ham radio community, and I think you are a leader of the ham radio community, is the biggest challenge to our hobby today?
Well, again, you have to know, if you're asking me that question, the one I'm asking you. The one I've got my laser focus on, and it really is what I see nationwide and even out of this country, is the attraction and the recruitment to make amateur radio be a vital and a vibrant choice that somebody makes to get into, because the way this new generation can contribute can only be an asset to the rest of us. And I think that gauntlet needs to be picked up by more and more clubs. It gives the club a new purpose, a new goal. And I've never seen where it wasn't successful once you give them a head start as to how they can do all these things. That's what's stopping a lot of the QCWA chapters as I go and speak at the local ones and across the country as well. They think it's a good idea to have young people in the hobby, but it's a good idea and that's where it ends and we move on to another issue. But if you pick up, because I can give you the tools and the methodology of how to take the next step, the rewards are just right across the board for everybody, not only for the young person, but for the organization and for amateur radio as well.
My brain is stirring here. So I'm going to send you an email after I'm done with an idea. Yeah, I think this is terrific. This is usually the question I ask, but I'm asking it maybe a little bit different way. So we have our new hams, and we have hams that are returning to the hobby. I left for 25 years because I was doing this for a living. So I got to play with all my radios during the day, but I never got on the air. And then I returned. So what advice would you give to new hams and returning hams to the hobby? Where would you send them?
Okay, I think the key to almost anything worthwhile that you're going to take on is involvement. Get involved, whether it be with a local club, and if you've got an active amateur radio club, that's one of the best ways of doing it. And if the club needs revitalization, why not be the one who comes in with ideas? And don't reinvent the wheel is the message I try to get out. Years ago when I began this, I had to sell everybody on the idea of why it was important to get young people involved. And that's really no longer the case in my experience. They may need a little nudge, but everybody agrees that it's a good thing to be doing. So I would say involvement on whatever level it is. If you're looking to enjoy something, get involved with it. I was a member of RCA for many years. I paid my dues, went to a couple of the banquets and meetings. But when I got involved, it became a whole other dedication, passion, and things for me to become excited about. Find what excites you. Is it satellite communications? Is it being a volunteer? Then contact me and I'll tell you how to get involved with your local schools. The trick, I believe, to enjoying life is to become involved with something that you're really interested and can become passionate about.
That's amazing advice, Carole, and you've been an amazing guest. And I am so grateful that you said yes to me when I sent you my invitation and that we could schedule this QSO. So for now, 73, thanks so much for coming on.
73, Eric, and thank you.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Carole. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in WB2MGP in the search box at the top of the page. Be sure to click on the Expo menu item at the top of the page for updates on the upcoming QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo. There is a scrollable box on the home page now where I am answering questions as they come in to reduce the amount of email that I'm receiving. Sorry about that. Please check the home page from time to time before the Expo next week. My thanks to both Icom America and QRP Labs for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of these fine sponsors by clicking on their links in the show notes pages or by using QSO Today in the coupon box at checkout. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor any of these episodes into written text, please push the button in the middle of the show notes page. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Please become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. I am grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference. QSO Today is now available on a host of platforms, including Spotify, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and the iTunes Store. A list of these services is on the right side of the show notes pages. Stitcher is still my favorite. My thanks to my friend and colleague Ben Bresky, who makes every QSO Today interview guest and this host sound brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.